welcome to all that are on. I don't know what the numbers are showing, and my antiquated system, the camera's not working and the speakers aren't working, so I'm calling in by phone. But I can see the video when it comes up, and I've got the agenda in front of me. So welcome to all of you to the NWSOFA-Indivisible Climate Change meeting. We're trying to do new things here with work from remotes, and it'll be interesting. So let's see, you wanted me to ask, at least on the agenda, if there was anyone new to the group beside the speakers, and if they can identify who they might be.
No. Just kidding.
Or is that going to be problematic?
If that's our cue, well, we can start there. If that's our cue.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Mark Burrows. I was a locomotive engineer for 37 years at the Chicago Northwestern and the Canadian Pacific. I'm a former co-chair of Railroad Workers United, which is a rank and file caucus of activists in the rail unions, fighting to strengthen our unions to more effectively fight for safety and dignity, and safety for us obviously impacts the safety of the community, is part of what we're going to discuss. I served as a delegate at the 2011 and 2014 international conventions for the United Transportation Union, Local 1433, and I'll let Jerry introduce herself.
Hello, thank you all for joining us today. Please excuse if any of this equipment is running a little rough. We tried very hard to get it working as best we could in the time we had. I think it'll be okay, but if we have some bumps along the way, please forgive us. My name is Jerry Songer. I am the legislative director of the Local 1211 union, teachers union. I'm not here in an official capacity, but my union has supported this work, and they've definitely supported Rail Workers United and their quest for better working conditions. I originally got involved in this issue because I had in my own backyard the worst case scenario. That is not the way you want to do politics, but I ended up with going from 2 to 3 trains a day to over 20 in my entire house vibrating. So that is how I got involved in this issue. I've been working and presenting with Sierra Club. I've traveled the state doing the presentation that you're going to see tonight, and working very hard to support our engineers, our railroad workers. So I'm gonna Mark has a bit of an intro. I'll put him on, and then I'll begin the presentation.
If we're ready for that, I just wanted to.
Mark, can I interrupt you a second there? I just want to do a couple more introductory things for NWSOFA. If that's all right.
Absolutely. I just was waiting for my cues.
Yep, I will do that. If there are new people on listening here that don't know anything about NWSOFA and Indivisible, there's a sign-up link online if you're in the meeting thing, or I can give it to you if you want to have it. It's http://www.nwsofa.org/contact-us. Now that's long, but we can get it to you, and maybe we could do that later. OFA originally was Obama's Organizing for America. After he became elected, a lot of people who were involved in the issues decided they wanted to keep issues going. So OFA reorganized, and NWS is the Northwest Suburban chapter of that. Sarah and Bill are the co-chapter leads. NWSOFA has many issue groups that are working on things. One of them is climate change, and I'm the lead for that. We have a gun violence prevention group. We have a Stand With Women group. We have a fiscal policy group. There are several others that are working on good things. We have several coalition groups that are working with us, including Sierra Club, Citizens Climate Lobby, Palatine Cool Cities, Barrington Go Green, March for Science, Faith in Place, the Palatine Bike Club, League of Women Voters, St. James Earth Shepherds, Harper College, Oakton College, Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, Citizens Utility Board. There are probably some others that I don't have off on my list, but so there are people working on all kinds of things here. And I attended your presentation, Mark and Jerry, last fall, and I thought it was something that we should link our groups to. And so that's why we're having you here. And I hope somewhere down the road we can do this, on a live thing, maybe at the Palatine Library or, another meeting venue after we get back to normal. Earlier today, Bill asked if I would connect a little bit of something of your presentation to climate change. I'm a retired environmental scientist. I worked with a company called Weston Solutions, and I was involved in several emergency response things like Katrina and the BP oil spill and the pipeline spills in Michigan. I actually did participate in oversight on one rail car accident in Paulsboro, New Jersey, which leaked vinyl chloride. Anyway, climate change can be broadened into what I term all things environmental, and there are a lot of things that link to climate change. And so in our scenario tonight, working with the railroad transportation of dangerous goods, it connects to all kinds of other science issues, and Jerry's discussion centers on dangerous goods transportation by rail. And her principal issue here is the explosive oil being transported by rail cars, but there's a lot of other nasty stuff in rail cars that we don't know about, but we probably should, often coming right through our neighborhoods and near schools. The climate part of this is also our continued use of fossil fuels, and what I hope comes from the meeting tonight for climate change is an awareness of some of these connections and possible legislative action and education. And I think, Jerry, you might want to comment on this because I think maybe you're partly responsible for getting our state senator, Ann Gillespie, to put a legislation in the state Senate. And so with that, I will go back to you guys. I'm going to go back to look at my agenda here. So Sarah and Bill, do you have any other comments at this point?
Yes, if I could just kind of jump in for a second here. Just kind of setting some rules of the road here for tonight. And I got to get over to a slide 2 here. We want everyone to be as respectful as you can. We know the people who will come in and come out, so please mute all the TVs, radios, kids, dogs, and parakeets. If you're using 2 devices, like a computer, a tablet, or a phone, make sure both are muted. When not speaking on your phone, if you press *6 on WebEx, it will mute you. And for tonight's presentation, comments section on WebEx. It's located on the lower right-hand side. It's a thought icon. Just go in there and type a question, and then when we're all done, we can have Harry and Mark go through those. There also is a raise your hand symbol on WebEx that you can tap. We'll make a note of who is raising their hand, but we won't call you until later on. In terms of who we are, we're the Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action. And we are in the Northwest Suburbs, 6 townships, starting with Elk Grove and Schaumburg, going over to Des Plaines, Wheeling, Barrington, and Wheeling, Barrington. I think I'm missing one of them there, but we cover of those. And there's like basically 600,000 folks in that area. Core purpose of NWSOFA is to make sure that we have a more accessible and participatory democracy. And in our world, we do this by doing everything we can to make sure that there's one vote, one person. Our motto is to respect, empower, include, and organize. And we are organizers. We have 9 different issue teams, and they're constantly, like Mark on climate change, they're organizing their groups, they're having meetings, now online meetings. We mobilize and we recruit people for actions. This is our dual snowflake chart. You can see all the 2 groups. Climate change is represented by CC. We have a Restore Our Democracy group, Gun Violence Prevention group, All on the Line group, working with President Obama and Eric Holder on gerrymandering. We have, of course, our Affordable Care Act for health revisions, etc. Our comprehensive immigration reform teams, social outreach for diversity, and our Stand With Women group that had a lot of great successes over the last year, particularly the ERA in Illinois and across the country. And we have fiscal and economic group, and then we also have chapter events. This is our communications group. What is interesting about the organization is we call it our secret sauce. It's our volunteers, and we have a group of 28 volunteers that work almost 50-50 between the issue teams and the communications teams, but it is really a wonderful group. With that, Mark, I'm going to let you do the introduction, and then we'll turn the computer over to Jerry and Mark.
Okay, so I have, the brief bios that we had in the beginning of this, and I think Jerry and Mark Burrows, you've already said something about who you are and what you were doing. If you want to add to that, you could do that here at this point. From here on, I'm going to go on the mute, and I'm going to watch the presentation. And Bill, unless you have anything else you want me to put in there, I would just say, take it away.
Okay. Christine, can you give the presenter to Jerry?
Yeah, let Jerry just take it.
Okay, Jerry. Jerry and Mark, it's yours.
Okay, I'll take that as the cue I've been waiting for. I'd like to thank you on behalf of Railroad Workers United. I'd like to thank all of you for this opportunity to have this discussion, as well as on behalf of Jerry and Michelle Burke, our technical advisor. We'll introduce her somewhere in the course of the evening. Just a brief intro to follow up. I feel we're here tonight to discuss the potential hazards posed to the children in our schools and, by logical extension, the public, our communities, and the environment when the railroad industry fails to operate with maximum safety. Among other topics, we'll be highlighting examples of some of the worst case scenarios and the consequences when things go wrong, because these incidents serve as a poster child for what can happen anytime, anywhere along freight railroad lines and the surrounding areas for quite some distance. The most prominent example in the recent past is the incident in the town of Lac-Mégantic, Quebec on July 6, 2013, where an out-of-control oil train derailed, exploded, leveling a portion of the downtown area and incinerating 47 people. The rail carriers, the Canadian government, and the United States government, which had a role in this tragedy, would have us believe that that was a one-time incident and the appropriate measures have been put in place so that that doesn't happen again. Move along. Everything's fine. Nothing to see here. We're here to present a different narrative that we feel merits your attention and concern, that everything is not okay. And on that note, I'll turn it over to Jerry. Thank you.
All right, so let me get my presentation up here and running.
As Jerry does that, a reminder to everybody to go to the comments and make comments if you have questions that you'd like to have addressed later on, or just want to make a general comment.
Okay, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
You're good?
Yep.
Okay, please let me know if there's any sound issues as we go along here, okay? So we're going to be talking about oil trains and hazardous materials near our schools. Not only do I originally got involved in this issue because it is literally in my backyard, but being a teacher, my next horror was the fact that these trains are not only going through highly populated residential areas, they're also passing our schools. And as an educator, I feel a moral responsibility to make sure our children are safe. So that's what has originally got me motivated and why I have since 2014 not given up on this issue, nor will I, until either the trains are safe or I no longer am here. This is a lifelong commitment for me. So everything we're going to be going over today, are you able to see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay. If you write down this website and you go to the About page, most of what I'm going to be talking about is in a presentation there. So I know there's some people that are not joining us by video. There will be some video that I will be playing, and if at some point you would like to go over that or go back over any of the information in this presentation, you can get the information here.
Can I also add, we are on Facebook Live for those who are on the phone under either Burke Labs or under Jerry's personal Facebook page, and we've also shared the link to the Facebook page for People Before Profits as well.
So I first want to call your attention. Can this be moved?
Yeah, we can.
I want to call your attention to the victims of the Lac-Mégantic tragedy. Yeah, we're not getting my mouse, so I'm not able to move some things around here. It's okay, I can.
Yeah.
All right, so this image shows 31 of the 47 people decimated in this disaster. I especially would like to point out the pictures of the mother and the two children. This particular family, if you're familiar with Bruce Campbell, he did a lot of the policy making after this disaster in Lac-Mégantic. He personally knows this family, so it seems like, okay, well, this happened somewhere else, it can't happen here. This is a very personal story, and it directly impacts some of the people I know and have a great deal of respect for.
You could even see it from space,
Are we okay
as
with-
NASA's Tsunami NPP satellite took this image of the glow of the fire. People jumped from the third floor of buildings in the central business district to escape the humongous fire. As the blazing oil flowed over to the ground, it entered the town's storm sewage system and emerged as huge fires towering from over storm sewer drains, manholes, and even chimneys and basements of buildings in the area. Around 150 firefighters were deployed to the scene, describing as looking like a war zone. Oh my God!
So you get a taste of the horror behind this incident. When you see these trains pass, that's not always what comes to our imagination, but every time I see a train pass, this is the image I have in my mind. 2 points I want to make about this. Number one, it did not have to happen. Number two, we are fortunate because we have something that the victims of this tragedy did not have. We know, we have the knowledge. And now it's a question of what to do with that. So the rail line near my home is the EJ&E, and it's Canadian National that runs past my home. So that was the first I started investigating. They have routes that run through Canada, America, Mexico. This was once a publicly owned railway, and it is now considered private corporate property. So it was paid for with public tax dollars. It is now privately owned, and PPPs or private-public or public-private partnerships is another issue, kind of a side issue, but another very important issue that we need to keep in the back of our minds, where our tax dollars are going and who's profiting from that, and what our return on that investment is or is not. Canadian National must grant permission for public access to the tracks, the maintenance records, safety records. So they own that information. It is not public, even though taxpayer dollars have paid for this railroad. These are some secondary routes, and this is only Canadian National. So you can see how extensive of this railway is. A common carrier provides services to the general public under license or authority provided by a regulatory body. This body can create, interpret, and enforce these regulations with independence and finality. A common carrier has to demonstrate that it is fit, willing, and able, and my argument is that they are not. Common carriers typically transport people or goods according to defined and published routes, time schedules, and rate tables. So it's about getting the goods there. Safety is not the priority. The US government has exclusive regulatory authority, so that is our target. Yet there has been no government mandate made for regulation of industry safety standards. Well-financed special interest groups represent, protect, and lobby for the interests of crude oil producers and refineries. The American Petroleum Institute's budget is around $235 million a year. It could be more than that. Now, this is from 2016. The Association of American Railroads has a budget of $50 million to $60 million. So you can see they have a lot of money invested in making sure that the industry's interests are represented. The industry will argue that there's a government-backed need-to-know policy pertaining to rail transport of hazardous substances under the guise of national security. They will argue that, but that is not, in fact, true. The United States federal government decided that its public does not need to know and therefore has obstructed public access. Again, this is what the rail companies are arguing. But the public does not only need to know, it does have a right to know. And the transport of hazardous substances via rail has threatened public safety, water sources, and the environment. So we need to be very vigilant in demanding information that we do have a right to have. Precision railroading. As of 2011, Bill Gates was announced as the largest single shareholder of stock in Canadian National, which was once, as I said, a publicly owned and financed railroad. Canadian National is the only rail company that has a direct route from oil-rich Western Canada to the refinery-rich Gulf Coast, which is north-south. Their model of precision railroading, they run regularly scheduled trains that leave at predetermined times. Each car has a specific trip planned and fits the design of the schedule, which means they're focusing on what matters most to the customer, not the public. And one of the things that Mark had shared with me that shocked me was that every engineer knows that it's not a matter of if he gets fired, it's a matter of when, because they are held to the schedule, which is not always feasible. If they, if they try to press the speeds, it becomes dangerous to the public. If they don't, they could get fired. So that's the quandary that our engineers are faced with. There are many other U.S. railways. Warren Buffett is the billionaire investor who bought BNSF Railway in 2009. It's become the nation's leading hauler of crude oil. They run east to west. Other dominant eastern railroads include NS and CSX. The dominant western carriers are the BNSF and Union Pacific. 6 of the 7 largest rail carriers transport crude oil throughout the Chicagoland area. And currently, there are several major rail projects underway. The Amtrak Hiawatha proposal, which I have to say has been put to the side for now. That has been a major success in this area. They were arguing to put a holding track along the North Shore, and fortunately, they did get some representation from Senator Julie Morrison and Congressman Brad Schneider, and for that at this point has been laid to rest. Canada is still pushing for it. I'm sorry, Wisconsin is still pushing for it. So they're staying vigilant in their fight. You know, they're not saying it's completely over, but for right now, it has been laid to rest. There's also the CREATE program, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and the Union Pacific Metro West Line. So the CREATE program, here I want you to really pay attention to how our public tax dollars are spent, and this is where, you know, I want you to really start thinking about these private-public partnerships. Pay attention to how much the public investment is compared to the private. So we've got $500 million from the state of Illinois. We've got $450 million from the federal government, $325 million from the rail industry. So that's your private investment. And then we have $30 million from the city of Chicago. There's also another $80 million from the Chicago Region Environmental and Transportation Efficiency Program. That's the CREATE program. And for $52 million from transportation and investment, generating, I lost my PowerPoint, sorry. Getting it back. From the Transportation Investment Generating Economic Recovery Grant. So when you add it all up, we have 1.1 billion public tax dollars compared to a measly 325 million private dollars. So shouldn't that make us 71% shareholders in these rail lines? But we are not. We have to ask permission to even venture on their property. This is our return on investment. So an explosion resulting from the Bakken crude oil can decimate everything within a 1-mile radius blast zone. It comes with up to a 3-mile radius evacuation zone. Railway infrastructure. Illinois is served by 47 common freight carrier railroads and 10 private freight carriers. There's 25 major junctions where trains are headed in different directions on different railroads where they regularly meet. Additionally, there's 760 passenger trains that pass through the region each day. So I want you to think about the wear and tear on these railroad tracks. The volume of cargo transported via rail to, from, or through Chicago is forecast to increase nearly 150% between 2010 and 2040. Think about that, 150% more. I've already got 20 a day going past my home. Rail lines were built on more than a century. They were built more than a century ago in Chicago, and they were not configured for the volume and type of freight that's currently being carried. So these are, our railways are not in the best condition, and I'm being very nice in saying that. There are 5 corridors that exist that provide rail transport of cargo into, out of, and through Chicago. You can see those 5 here. There's the Central, Beltway, Western Avenue, East-West, and Passenger Express. I'm not going to go into this slide too much because as environmentalists, I know you know about fracking. In 2006, 4,700 train cars carried highly explosive crude oil. By 2013, more than 400,000 cars hauled crude oil. So that's an 8,500% increase. Most trains carry more than 3 million gallons of explosive crude in trains over 1 mile long. There is no legal limit to the length of a train. Crude oil production. I think most of you are probably familiar with the North Dakota Bakken crude shale deposits. There's also deposits in Texas, Ohio, Nebraska, Colorado, and Kansas, which could eventually contribute to as much as 5 million barrels per day, according to the most optimistic forecasts. The Bakken field may well hold more than people think, and Ohio's Utica shale has barely been tapped. The deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico could give substantially more, perhaps 1 million to 2 million barrels a day on top of the 1.3 that's currently produced.
What's increasingly evident is that shale gas is overwhelmingly abundant right here in the USA.
In the last few years, we've discovered the equivalent of 2 Saudi Arabias of oil in the form of natural gas in the United States. Not 1, but 2.
We have twice as much natural gas in this country, is that what you're saying, than they have oil in Saudi Arabia?
I'm trying to very clearly say exactly that.
So there's a lot of oil in this country and a lot of people who would like to get their hands on it. Just read this. So the oil business is booming. One of the things I hope to impress on you is how quickly this has increased and how much more we're going to see. Justin McCullough has predicted a drastic increase in where we've been at over the last few years, which I'm going to show you has already been significant. So we have a graph. This goes from 1991 to 2015, and you can see that export volumes reached a record of 354 barrels per day in 2018, with a vast majority of oil going to refineries on the U.S. Gulf Coast and Midwest. The Alberta government plans to put another 120,000 barrels per day on rails by this year. I should have corrected that, sorry. So that's what we're seeing right now. So because if you're going to see an increase in transport, you're going to see an increase in rail and derailments. That is just common sense. And McCullough has proved true because already since January, we've seen a significant increase in the derailments. So please pay attention to this picture. We've got, if you're able to see it, we've got the smallest line is 1,000 barrels a day. The largest is 800,000 barrels a day. So this is where we were in 2010. This is where we were in 2014. So you can see the drastic increase. This is even more shocking. The red shows train loading, the blue shows offloading. This is where we were at in 2010. Here we are in 2013. Again, the red is loading, blue offloading, and now we have green, which is barge. Want that to sink in for a second. that this is just in 3 years, we've gotten to this. One of the things that we're fighting with is preemption. So I've been involved in, as you said earlier, I've been involved in getting some legislation passed here in the state of Illinois, but depending on what the legislation is at the state level, you could be fighting it at the federal level. And I'm going to go into that in a little later. But basically, as I said before, the federal government is going to have the final authority over legislation. I'm getting some feedback here. Are you guys able to hear me?
Would everybody please mute your phones or your computers? Thank you.
Oil by rail transloading companies are classified as non-carriers, and this is where we have an opportunity to attack. If we're going to attack, this is the place. Just like I was talking about along the North Shore and stopping the rail, we have the best way to defend ourselves is to stop things from coming before they get here. And oil by rail transloading companies, they are non-carriers, and the operations will not fall under the protection of federal preemption. So at the state level, this is a good place to fight. There are no pipelines to feed refineries on the West Coast, at least not yet. They want to get them through though. And they may be doing it right underneath our nose, and I'll talk about that in a few slides. So access to the Bakken crude and Canadian tar sands is only available by rail. Public opposition along with local and state support can block the development of transloading facilities, which slows rail service. Municipalities can pass an ordinance banning new oil infrastructure projects. So again, there is work that can be done at the local and state level. I think I'm going to skip this. This is about the transloading and stellar distribution, which is in Chicago. This is what these refineries look like where the oil is processed. This is one in Joliet along the Des Plaines River, but I'm going to show you some that are even closer and could have recently been a catastrophic disaster, but we're not hearing about this in the news. This is what our refineries look like in 2015 to give you an idea. Most of the oil coming from Canada is being shipped to the Gulf Coast, so north and south. Most of the Bakken crude is going from west to east. They like to be around water. The refineries use water in their processing. I'll talk a little bit about the DOT-111s. They are being phased out. We're not seeing as many of them on the rails these days, but they do still exist. They were recently involved in the derailment in Lake Forest. These were the worst. They call them the Ford Pinto of rail cars. They were originally meant to haul corn syrup. As early as 1991, the NTSB warned that the cars were inadequate for flammable materials and were unable to withstand the forces of an accident. Right here is where I would like to put a little plug in for Justin McCulka's book, only because he does an excellent job, as does Bruce Campbell in his book, talking about regulatory capture is the term that they're calling this. You would think the NTSB would be able to say, okay, this is not safe. But, so let's change the regulations. But they are unable to do so. And they do a great job. I can't even begin to explain that that facet of this issue like they can. We do have upgrades. We've got the CPC 1232, and now we have, what is the last one called? My memory is failing me.
The DOT 117s or the other?
The 117s. Yeah, we have the 117s and the retrofitted 117s. It was the 117s that were involved in the Chicago derailment.
East Chicago.
East Chicago derailment. Yes, and I've got it right here. I should have turned the slide. The DOT 117s have also derailed and were punctured. The DOT 117s are not the same as pressure cars that are used to move hazardous materials such as liquid propane. So, they're still, even though they're shipping something with a 1 mile radius blast zone, and now they're going to be used to ship on liquefied natural gas, which is even worse, they're still not as protected as pressure cars. So that is another thing we should be asking for. In June 2018, the first train consisting of the 117 retrofitted cars derailed in Iowa. 32 cars left the tracks and 14 punctured, resulting in an oil spill of 230,000 gallons into a flooded river. They don't appear to offer any substantial benefits over earlier models for surviving derailments intact. Tank cars are tested at 14 to 15 miles per hour, but the average derailment speed for heavy freight trains is 24 miles per hour. Currently, hazardous hazmat tankers can go as fast as 40 miles per hour is what we have.
50 outside of high urban threat areas.
50 miles outside of high urban threat areas, 40 miles in densely populated areas. But again, as I said, the average derailment speed is 24 miles per hour. So we should be fighting for speed limits. Regulators say that they'll consider lowering it to 30, have not done that. In fact, they've raised it in some areas. Speeds in excess of 25 miles per hour are considered irresponsible given the known weaknesses of tank cars. Current air braking systems used in oil and ethanol trains are based on technology developed in the 1860s, the Civil War era. Oil and rail industries say it could cost $21 billion to develop and install brakes, and they claim minimal benefits. The benefit is still debated. The engineers are claiming that they're still, even the best brakes are still causing problems. The ECP brakes, which are the electronically controlled pneumatic braking systems, there was legislation mandating them, but that was repealed by the Trump administration. So the engineers recently got something saying that they are no longer a requirement for hazardous trains carrying hazardous materials. The FAST Act transportation bill, it was a 1,300-page bill. It was crammed through Congress. It was it's a $305 billion bill that extends federal transportation funding for 5 years, streamlining the Federal Railroad Rehabilitation Loan Program by providing low-interest loans. Again, we're seeing many of our tax dollars here being used for upgrades to private industry, such as rebuilding bridges and purchasing new locomotives. Right after this was passed, that's when I started seeing the upgraded trains rolling past my home. So really what this appeared to me to do was buy a new fleet for the rail industry. Keep in mind that they're making more profits these days than ever, but they're not investing much of those profits back into their industry. We are. Another area that we should be looking for legislation to help make things safer. Again, I don't ever want to confuse that with safe. This will never be safe, but we can, for the time being, make it safer. The read vapor pressure of gasoline can range from 7 to 15 psi. It's explosive, which is why pressure cars are needed for transport. Oil in samples from Lockheed antique tank cars range from 9 to 9.6 psi. Oil involved in the massive oil train fire and explosion in Mount Carbon, West Virginia, had a RVP of 19.9 psi. Samples from Lynchburg were over 14, and Bakken crude falls to the same RVP range as gasoline, but pressure cars are not required, as I've said. Some regulators argue that stabilization, or you might also hear the term degasification, could make Bakken crude safer. The industry argues that there are no studies to support its effectiveness, but again, it would lower sales by a reported 2%, so they have an interest in saying it's not effective. Canadian National is well documented. We can't trust the industry to tell us the truth. They're known for minimizing, not disclosing, and outright lying. When I found out about what the trains passing my neighborhood were carrying, there had been a derailment in Mundelein, which is right down the tracks from me. I had a concern that there could, my community depends on well water. So one of my first horrors was, could there have been a spill that was not reported? I called the county. I called the EPA, both the Illinois and the US. All three gave me the same story. They refused to investigate a spill unless Canadian National reported a spill. So the very industry that would not want anybody to know about a spill has to be the one to say, come investigate me. That to me was the wrong answer. The derailment in Lockheed Antique killed over 47 unsuspecting people. It burned for 3 days. In Cherry Valley, Illinois, an explosion and fire killed a passenger in a car. You don't just have to be living near a rail line or working near a rail line or going to school near one. You could just simply be stopped at a rail grade crossing. That's what happened to Zwila Taliz. She and her pregnant granddaughter were stopped at the rail grade crossing. They were unable to escape the fireball as they tried to run from the burning train. Neither Zwila or her unborn grandchild survived that explosion. Emergency preparedness. This is another thing we need to be fighting for. There's not a fire department in the area equipped to put out the inferno caused by the atomic bomb-sized exploding oil trains. Most police and firefighters have not received training, or if they have, it's questionable as to whether or not it's enough or even good training. Of those trained, the content of workshops provided may not be adequate. They don't always include field experience. Mosier, Oregon Fire Chief Jim Appleton argued that the special firefighting foam touted as being designed to specifically put out oil fires does not work. The problem is, what he said was, the oil trains, the tankers produce so much heat that the foam just disintegrates before it can suppress the fire. So he said one of the keys to being able to attack a fiery derailment is access to water. Again, my community is not alone in not even having fire hydrants. There's also deregulation. The Staggers Act of 1980 deregulated the American railroad industry. The current rail industry norm is for freight trains to carry a 2-person crew, an engineer operating the train and a conductor handling various other tasks. At times, the rail industry has circumvented this standard. And that's what ended up happening to the derailment in Canada. At times, engineers are required also to work long hours, and they're expected to manage technology, which one engineer in public comment compared to playing 3 video games at one time. Again, with not much sleep. Trains are legally allowed to be left unattended and idling. This is what led to the Lac Mégantic disaster. As long as the railroad has a procedure plan on file. There's no legal limit to the length of freight trains. Derailment suggests that 70 to 74 cars per train may be safer. Most oil trains carry more than 3 million gallons of explosive crude, and only individual trains carrying more than 1 million gallons of crude or more need to be reported to state emergency officials. The information is not guaranteed to reach local communities.
Get up or down.
I'm getting somebody talking in here. So the information now, they have passed legislation to get the information from the industry to the municipalities, but that's as far as it goes. The public still does not have access to the information as to what's being carried, when it's being carried. But really, if you look on any rail line, you're going to see this being carried quite frequently. FEMSA 2014, the U.S. Transportation Department recently issued final rules. So this is the legislation that mandated that we get at least the information to the municipalities. The railroads need to establish geographic response zones. So we're at least beginning to see a little better emergency preparedness, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. The compliance with these amendments were required as of last August 27, 2019. This is some of the current legislation. Senator Terry Link introduced and passed Senate Bill 24. So in Illinois, we do have a mandate that at least 2 individuals must be operating a freight train. But again, there's the issue that could be fought in the courts, the issue of preemption. Congressman Brad Schneider co-sponsored U.S. House Resolution 5553. That is, and there's also a U.S. Senate Bill 1979. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. We've got U.S. House Resolution 1748 and U.S. Senate Bill 1979. Those are both, the House and Senate versions of the Safe Freight Act. So both of those bills are currently in committee. They can sit in committee quite some time. They may never come out. We should be contacting our elected officials to get those bills moving. Recently there was the Crude by Rail Volatility Standards Act. So I told you a little bit about the vapor pressure. This would mandate that it prohibits the transportation of crude oil with a read vapor pressure of more than 9.5 pounds per square inch. There is no accountability. It's the oil producers and refineries that own the rail cars, not the railroads. And it's the railroad's responsibility to regulate its own infrastructure, which means the railway and bridges. A review of 31 crashes on oil trains since 2013 puts track failure at the heart of the growing safety problem. And track problems were blamed in 59% of crashes, more than double the overall rate for freight train accidents. If you can see the picture, this was in Chicago. This is actually where I met Mark. I was on a tour and looking at some of the rail infrastructure, and the bridges are rotted and unsafe. Many are. There's 70,000 to 100,000 such bridges in the U.S. with no regulation. The oil trains cause unusual track damage. They impart higher than usual forces to track infrastructure. Just 3 inches of movement between rails or wheels lifted 1/2 inch can cause a derailment. Even if tracks conform to federal standards, they can separate under the heavy force of a train. Wide gauge, which is the space between rails, is the single largest cause of accidents involving track defects. Private railroad experts, there's a sloshing effect, which that is what can widen the gauge of the railway. They are considered the primary factor contributing to track defects, especially those caused by slower speeds. So you don't want to go too fast, you don't want to go too slow. Again, this is another pressure on the backs of our engineers. Sloshing also increases the severity of an accident and the risk of a tank rollover. Crude oil is heavier than ethanol, and weight limits can be met before the tank car is full, creating more headspace and increased sloshing. So even though there are weight limits, the rail industry will push that because they want these tankers full. So you're either going to have the problem of the sloshing or you're going to have the weight. Both are bad. I think I'm going to skip over this one and kind of move around. There's an issue with cross ties. Many can be defective and they're allowed to be. Hydrogen sulfide. So Bakken crude oil, they use chemicals when fracking, and these chemicals stay in the oil. Hydrogen sulfide was found to be in Bakken crude oil. The U.S. law prohibits exposure to more than 50 parts of hydrogen sulfide. Anything above that triggers shock, convulsions, and coma. Pushed beyond 700 ppm, and death is likely within 2 breaths. Enbridge discovered crude with 1,200 parts per million of the gas, almost twice as much as what it takes to kill you. Exposure to hydrogen sulfide, no matter how seemingly insignificant, can lead to internal organ failure, infertility, immune system suppression, blood disorders, cancer, birth defects, and genetic mutations. And this is what we have going right next to our children.
What's the ETA on fire and ambulance?
1222 Effingham, 10-4, Kinmon, Alma Fire Department advised ETA 5 minutes, ambulance 5 to 7 minutes.
2210-4, advise ambulance and EMS to expedite. I'll be having the car checking victim.
So what I want you to pay attention to is how quickly it takes for somebody to die. This is ammonia. And he is no longer breathing. So there is some argument as to whether this is a real video or whether this is a training video. But I left it in this presentation because either way, it shows you what I want you to see. And that's how quickly our children could die if they're exposed to this. Yeah, it looks like smoke. A teacher could bring a child outside of a school building and try to get them to what they consider a safe area. And if they bring those children through something that looks like smoke, they're not going to last very long. This one is upsetting to me. This needs to stop.
What's the EPA on?
Okay, there we go.
Good evening. In a little more than
This is
48
chlorine
hours, there have
gas.
been 3 railroad tank car accidents in southeastern United States. Before dawn this morning, another derailment in Youngstown, Florida, punctured a tank car, sending chlorine gas into the air and killing at least 8 people. More than 60 people are in the hospital, some of them in critical condition. Kenley Jones reports from Florida.
The train which derailed this time was a southbound freight of the Atlanta and St. Andrews Bay Railroad, a small line which operates between Dothan, Alabama and Panama City, Florida. A tank car carrying poisonous chlorine gas was ruptured in the wreck. A deadly mist of gas emerged from the tank car. Motorists who were driving at night alongside the tracks were caught by surprise. Most of the victims who died were found in their cars along U.S. Highway 231.
People killed by poison gas like they were on a battlefield in World War I or something instead of just driving their cars along the U.S. highway.
So again, they didn't even have time to get out of their cars. This is how quickly they can die. In Youngstown, Florida, ultimately in that derailment, there were 8 fatalities, 118 people in the hospital, some critically injured, 2,500 residents evacuated. Most victims who died were found in their cars along the U.S. highway. There are 4 what they call oil train secrets. This is information that the oil industries, the rail industries do not want us to know. They don't want us to know their routing choices. They don't want us to know their worst case scenario models. They don't want to know the insurance amount that they have to cover themselves. Many times they don't have any. Sometimes it's we taxpayers that are paying for the insurance, which I believe is wrong. And I'm going to talk a little bit about insurance in a little bit. And they don't want us to know their emergency response plans when the unthinkable happens. Forest Ethics has now called Stand, has dubbed these the oil train secrets and is calling for their public release. If you're able to take a picture, if not, these are some apps that you can get to try to determine what you have going past either your home or your place of work if you want to do a little research. This is actually my home. You can see how close I am to the rail lines. They're carrying hazardous substances within yards of residential communities. CN trains transport hazardous substances within yards of playgrounds, schools, and other public locations. This is another picture that is very upsetting to me. You can see the trailer park. You know, in Lake Forest, in other places, they fight for a 20-foot retaining wall. Not that that would do any good, but you can see they certainly don't have one. Again, it's a trailer park. And even more infuriating, those children, if they're to go play on the playground on the opposite side of the tracks, will need to cross the tracks to get there. Again, if there was a derailment there, this would be decimated. This is Town Line Elementary, Hawthorne Elementary and Middle Schools North. Again, you can see, the, if you're able to see, the proximity of these elementary schools to the rail lines. Aspen Elementary School. Like Zurich High School, this is where my grandchildren, this is where they will attend unless I can talk some sense into my daughter, get them moved. St. Matthew's Lutheran School, Hawthorne Woods Aquatic Center, Wicklow East Park, Twin Rinks Ice Pavilion. I'm just trying to give you an idea. And this is what they're in danger of. This is West Virginia, a train carrying more than 100 tankers of crude oil. Those pictures of schools would not make it in this kind of a derailment and fire. So what are the odds of this happening near us? 6 have already happened in our Lake County area. We've had 2 in Buffalo Grove near the ice rink. We've had two in Northbrook at the same location where a bridge collapsed, killing 2 people the second time it collapsed because they didn't fix it right the first time. Those 2 people, a couple, they were not discovered until the next day when they were cleaning up. There was another one in Mundelein, and the last one in Lake Forest. Neither the Buffalo Grove or the Mundelein incident has a report filed with the FRA or the NSTB and TSB, which makes it difficult, possible to really get an idea of how many actual derailments there have been. As I said before, Justin Mikulka forecasts more. We should expect to see more accidents. Senate resolution, this is the one that I recently fought for. It was a resolution that I wrote and brought to Senator Julie Morrison. I testified to the Illinois Senate Education Committee. There was a unanimous vote to move it to the floor, and the very next day it was adopted. So what this will do is include school personnel and emergency response plans specific to hazardous materials, the storage and transport of hazardous materials. But it is a resolution. We still need a bill. The latest derailment was in East Chicago. I'm going to let Shelley talk a little bit about that because she actually went and investigated this derailment. I'm going to show you the quick news report because I want you to compare the news report to what you're actually going to hear about that derailment.
NBC 5 investigates yesterday's train derailment in nearby East Chicago, Indiana. Newly designed tank cars may have limited the damage.
We've reported on crude oil train incidents in the past in which fireballs shot to the sky or the product leaks, but that's not what happened. From the looks of it, these trains Wednesdays to the train was transported. Fire buildings. Nothing leaked. You're transporting at maximum speed, that's allowable here, and you had the cars derail, and the product was contained. If this happened several years ago, could it have been a different outcome? These are newer and stronger tank cars, and they're now required by the federal government.
They have several levels of protection, thermal protection, all these things. So, even we can see some little dents, things like that, but, all the product was contained.
The cause of the derailment last night is under investigation. Meanwhile, the Federal Railroad Administration says older model tank cars are being steadily phased out.
So what you're hearing from this news report is what sounds to me like an infomercial for newer, stronger, safer rail cars. They didn't puncture, no product leaked, we're good. But I'm going to have you take a look at the reality of what that derailment was.
Hey, everybody. So in East Chicago, back at the end of February, literally the day or so after, or within a day of when her resolution passed, we had this derailment in East Chicago, right next to a K-8 school. If that had happened during school hours, which it didn't, it could have been a lot worse. Originally, it was initially reported as 5 to 10 cars. I found out the next morning that it was 18 cars. 12 of them landed on their sides. None of them got punctured to leak, but they did have to empty out those cars before they were able to move them. So this is looking at where the derailment happened. So you can see the school kind of in the center of the screen and on the bottom. There's Euclid Avenue. Chicago Avenue is just south of the school. this is over in East Chicago, just in case people are just joining us. And the derailment happened just west of the school. And if you like zoom out on the picture, you got Gary Chicago International Airport just to the east. You've got a rail yard. You can see there's a rail yard right up at the top left. That's Indiana Harbor. It had us blocked for the better part of a full day or more. And here's a more kind of a zoomed out picture of where this happened.
And you can see the oil facilities, the storage facilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it
was right next to the storage facility there.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to kind of wrap this up. There is more, and you can see that on the website. More about side issues of pipeline and the storage of the hazardous materials, and the fracking that's going on in the Gulf Coast, which is concerning. You want to turn it over to?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Okay, thank you, Jerry and Michelle. I'm going to try to get through real quickly. As far as Lac Magentic, Bruce Campbell wrote a book that pretty much says it all. Lac Magentic rail disaster, public betrayal, justice denied. I don't have time to go into the details, but believe me, between our research and defending the coworker who was being scapegoated and Bruce's research in the book, clearly profit-driven, corner cutting, and if we had the opportunity to put the corporate bosses on trial, we could gain a conviction for corporate manslaughter. I'm glad that Jerry brought up the issue of the ammonia cars, because even if all the oil was left in the ground tomorrow, an ammonia car could open up in a heavily populated area, or chlorine. This stuff is instant death, and in a heavily populated area, the casualties could be massive. Railroad Workers United, and I invite you to go to our website, railroadworkersunited.org. We have a special section right up on the front of the homepage. We're calling 2019 the year of the derailment. There were 48 derailments in 2019 alone. Some of them were quite spectacular. Two that really stand out, and including, there was one in September in southern Alberta where 23 rail cars leaking octane had a 2-kilometer evacuation, and it could have been worse as the train, this is quoting the locals, that it could have been worse as the train was carrying ammonia. And outside of, in Saskatchewan, a town called Guernsey, within a period of a few weeks, there were 2 derailments. That one derailment leaked out 1.5 million liters of diluted bitumen, and another derailment leaked out 1.2 million liters. Why are these derailments happening? Are the workers just reckless, irresponsible? The main safety issues that we face, long and heavy trains. When I started out, 5,000 feet, a mile-long train, that was a challenge. Nowadays, they're 20,000 feet, 20,000 tons. They taught us about the laws of physics and teaching us how to handle these. So they know firsthand the laws of physics that they're challenging. Fatigue. Many rail workers work on 24-hour call, go to work on 2 hours notice. 12-hour plus days are the norm. 12-hour days are the norm. So you've got fatigue. We can't lay off. Many railroads have a 1 day a month policy, so people are coming in fatigued, exhausted. Deferred maintenance of the rolling stock and the infrastructure. Jerry touched upon this with the track issues. it is possible to inspect the rails. It is possible to maintain the rails. Cutbacks, everybody's being cut back. And there's less track inspections, and that is a very contributing factor to why these all these track-related derailments are happening. Carmen, who inspect the freight cars to make sure that the wheels roll freely. If they don't roll freely, they lock up, and eventually they get the heat. They just disintegrate. Many derailments are caused by that. They inspect the braking mechanism, and so as Carmen are cut, the rolling stock is not being properly inspected. And for the sake of time, I think I'll just, for the sake of time, I think I'll just leave it there, and perhaps more can be covered or addressed in question and answered. But again, I encourage you to go to our website. We have a wealth of information, and thank you very much for having this discussion.
So, do we want to open for Q&A?
So most everyone's unmuted, so the floor is open.
Yeah, this is Jim McGrath. I have two questions. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you, Jim.
Okay, thanks. So I live in Barrington. The CN goes through probably 20 times a day with all kinds of tank cars. So two questions. First one is, this product has to be transported somehow, and people are protesting pipelines. Which are better? Pipelines or tank cars?
Well, you know, in the rest of the PowerPoint, I didn't want to bring that in because I've already thrown so much at you. There's no good answer. Pipeline is not good either. What I'm advocating for is a budgeted long-term phase out. We need to keep in mind, you know, our railroad workers, the oil boom has been good for them because it's been business. We need to make sure that there is some plan in place as we start addressing this issue. But I don't want to use that term. You know it wants to come out of my mouth, and I know I'm talking to environmentalists, but I'm advocating for a long-term phase-out plan. There's no good way. Pipeline, I don't believe, is better than rail. I think they're both bad.
I'd like to just briefly answer and
introduce Fritz.
Fritz Edler is a member of Railroad Workers United, and he's with us in some way, shape, or form. And I would like to just real briefly to answer that. The question is safety. Whether it's railroad, whether it's pipeline, whatever it is, it has to be done safely. And I think part of what this whole discussion exposes is the lack of democracy. We need to be able to democratically decide. As a society, we need to be able to democratically answer that question based upon the science. And whatever the answer that we democratically arrive at, we need to mandate that whether it be pipeline or train, that it be done safely. And I just wanted to, I wanted to double, I forgot to mention the single employee crew issue in my haste to finish up in my time limit, which fortunately Jerry covered. But that's the best answer I can give to that question for now.
Okay, fair answer. Second question, as I mentioned, I live in a town where the CN goes through, I don't know how many times a day.
And you also have UP there too.
Yeah, has this presentation been shown to the municipalities along the line? Because this is, I mean, a scary thought. You have this stuff going through, and it goes by schools, it goes through by homes in Barrington?
We would certainly like to. And anywhere where Jerry and I can get an audience, we feel this is important information that the public needs to know, so that, I mean, knowledge is power. It's a cliche, but this is about empowering us as part of strengthening our democracy. So we're open for suggestions. We appreciate the invite, and trust me, wherever we get an invitation, we'll be there.
Okay, I just need your contact information.
All right, we'll make
I'll probably get it from Mark.
And I also want to point out Fritz Edler. He was involved in trying to help protect the engineers that were accused in the Lac-Mégantic incident. Fritz, do you want to comment on that?
Fritz, you got to pull yourself off of mute, buddy.
Yeah, right. Can you all hear me? This is Fritz Edler, and I was chair of the International Defense Committee for Tom Harding and Richard Labrie, railroad workers who were scapegoated for the Lac-Mégantic incident. And I guess the most important thing that we want to make a point as railroad workers about this question is that even though that so much of this wonderful presentation you've had tonight, I don't know what can we need to do something. I can't. I see pointing, but I don't see. Does any nod your head if you can hear me?
We can hear you, Fritz.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Had a few little technical difficulties, but what a wonderful presentation. The important thing is that we learned a tremendous amount out of the Lac-Mégantic wreck, and about, even though we didn't want to have a trial, the trial revealed tremendous things that now arm us with the things that we need to be able to do things more safely. But the important thing is that the railroad network is key to not just the question of how we can safely do our energy, but also to the question of climate change, which is the central interest of the group that is hosting this particular conversation. The question is, are we going to do what we have to do in order to be able to make the railroad networks serve their original purpose instead of becoming a fossil fuel export machine? The fossil fuel export machine that the continent's railroad networks are now in danger of becoming actually crowd all the other kinds of things we need, and for us to future-proof the railroad network in such a way that it'll serve us into the green transportation future. And I could speak more to the Lac-Mégantic trial, but I really think that the presentation was excellent, and I'd like to see what some of the other kinds of questions people have. I was getting ready to put a comment in about the pipeline question, and I absolutely agree that neither pipelines nor crude by rail are the thing that we want to be doing. But I will say this: using pipelines for the carrying of these kinds of products requires the creation of an entirely new infrastructure that has to be capitalized and built, and once it is built, it can serve no other purpose. The only purpose it can serve moving the crude oil and those kinds of products, and then that'll have to be justified. But we can do other things with rail.
Any other questions?
Jerry, I have a comment. In your presentation, you mentioned 2 derailments in Buffalo Grove near the ice skating rink.
Yes.
It's about a mile and a half, right along Lake Cook Road, east of me. For whatever reason, that was news to me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we've had 6, and people forget it because the media doesn't make a big deal. I mean, look at the one in East Chicago. That could have been because of the location right near those storage tanks. That could have blown. I mean, if one derailment of just oil tankers in Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, Canada, took out most of a village, what would it look like to have one of those storage tank fields blow up? And you don't hear about that. You don't hear about any of that in the news.
This is Maggie, I do remember the news coverage around the Buffalo Grove one where the couple was killed. Yeah, and I remember the stories being about crumbling infrastructure, the hazards of, having explosive materials in the trains being ignited and something like that wasn't even part of the coverage. It was all just about crumbling bridges.
Yeah, and the reason the bridges are crumbling is because the oil or the rail industry is left to regulate its own infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Even after the first time, that second time never should have happened. I mean, considering there had been a first one almost a year to the date earlier.
Yes.
They should have had that fixed after, at least in that first derailment, nobody died. In the second one, there was a couple that died, and Lord only knows if they were in that rubble suffering until they were found the next day, and they had, by that time, were deceased. This is horrific, what is going on. And it's like, when I was first trying to uncover this, nobody knew. I went from house to house in my neighborhood, letting people know, asking them if they knew, and letting them know if they didn't, which was every single case down the street throughout my neighborhood. I work in a school district, one of the largest in the state of Illinois. Nobody there knew, including my superintendent. Nobody knew what was going on. Most of the information I got was from Canada at the time. There was one, Forest Ethics, which is now STAND. They are on the West Coast. And then a lot of what I learned was from Justin Mikulka and DeSmog on the East Coast. But people do not know. Most of the information we get in the States is from local news media sources. So, we heard about this recent East Chicago derailment. Did they hear about it on the West Coast? Did it make national news? I doubt it.
Except for through the Railroad Workers United page.
Yes. Please join Rail Workers United. And in fact, if you go to people-4-profits.org, there's also a link where you can subscribe to a Railroad Workers United newsletter. And something else that I find very troublesome is it seems like almost monthly you get a report of a rail worker that has died. Sometimes more than one. That is inexcusable.
Mark Lundholm here, if I could make a couple of quick comments and questions. I'm just curious if for the railroad workers, are they given OSHA 40-hour hazardous materials training, since that's what they're transporting? As an environmental worker, you could not get on sites unless you had those things and refreshers every year. So, and probably the local fire departments and police ought to have those things too. So when you get a derailment and you know the hazard placards on the car, you know whether or not to get in there, or you know where to stay away, or maybe try to find some, what we hear about is PPE these days, but I don't think there's any PPE for anhydrous ammonia or, some of these other things like vinyl chloride. They volatilize and you'll be dead quickly. You'll have scarred lungs. But anyway, the railroad workers, do they get any safety training like that, and why not?
I would say the answer to that is no. Engineers get recertified. Our federal licenses, we've been federal licensed since the 90s, and now conductors are under that same federal licensing, and so we get recertified every 3 years. Have a little crash course on track train dynamics and rules and blah blah blah. And it's part of our job description that our responsibility to know what's in our train, know where it's at. But in answer to your question, we don't get any real special training, and yeah, no, we don't get anything special. And just on you talk about PPE, they'll fire you if you're not wearing your safe glasses or your earplugs. My last year before I retired, I was so fearful of not making it out because sometimes the Bensonville yard can be like the Wild West with just so much derailments and metal on metal. I was shopping around looking for some industrial type mask that in case something happened that I might be able to get out alive. But it'd be nice if they issued it, but no.
So one other quick rail question. And are we shipping pressurized liquid natural gas in tank cars yet, and how much?
We are. Not a lot yet, but I believe he signed it at the end of last year, so I do believe it is in effect by now. If it isn't, it will take effect shortly.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
You can't? Okay, this is my first time on this application, so I've been sort of muddling through it.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, this is Joe Salvato. I had a question on the training. And first of all, I do agree we got to cut down on fossil fuel consumption. Safety is important. But have you contacted or connected with any hazmat people in private industry? It's in terms of training people, even in the public sector, or training people, the railroad people? And the reason I ask that question, I've been retired for about 10 years, but I worked for a company. We hauled a lot of stuff, including Anhydros Ammonia. But we had a very good hazmat team, and I think they went out and actually trained people in the public sector. It seems like that would be a very good connection in terms of training. So have you connected to anybody?
The best answer I can give to that is we're trying to rally our co-workers that we need to take this fight into our unions to demand a safe working environment. We don't, as far as training to clean up and deal with the disaster after it's happened, we are adamant about trying to prevent these disasters. And so that's our focus, and trying to galvanize our co-workers to wage this fight, as well as to galvanize the community, because after Lock Majantic, everybody realizes that the public has a stake in this fight for a safe railroading operation. So that's the best answer I can give to that right now.
Well, and I've talked to, this kind of jumps ahead to our ask, but one of the things that Jim Appleton, the fire chief in Mosier, Oregon, he is a proponent of incident command centers, where you bring in multiple, facets of a response, to where there is one central location that is connecting everybody in a potential emergency, so that, all of this has been worked through before you actually get to the emergency. So everybody knows who they're contacting and what's going to be done and who does what. I mean, all the way down to, like, if students were evacuated from a building, you're going to need food service. So an emergency command center would help facilitate that. I guess that's the best I have to offer on that one also.
Okay, well, I was just going to say, these people that do this training, and again, I agree you want to prevent it from happening. I would think they being in this business, they would have some insight on how to prevent and how to do things safer. It just seems like it'd be a good connection.
Yeah, well, I think they would have great things to add. I guess the question is, will the rail industry respond? And there are things, again, that can be done on a local level. You know, there are things we can do to prepare in the worst case scenario. You know, one of the other things I'm fighting for is parents. You know, this is immoral. We have parents who have children in schools and they have no idea that their own children are in danger. Like, at least I know, you know, and my daughter knows that if my grandchildren attend Lake Zurich High School, that is unsafe. But I have the ability, because I know that, to move, and so does my daughter. But if you don't know that, that takes a lotus of responsibility away from the parent, and they're not able to make a decision that pertains to the safety of their own child, and that should be illegal, and it's definitely immoral.
Okay.
I'm going to add Joanne. I don't know if you're on mute or whatnot, but can you, I don't know how many people can actually read the chat, but can you read what you just wrote, or I can read it?
Oh, sure. I just unmuted myself. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi, Joanne.
Hi there. Hi, Jerry. Nice job. I really always learn something new from the presentations. I have been very active and one of the people to stop the holding tracks that were proposed to be built in Lake Forest and in Glenview, Illinois, working closely with Glenview and their village. 3-mile holding tracks for freight trains that would be basically allowed to idle indefinitely under the federal guidelines, so that the faster Metra trains and Amtrak trains could pass. This is all part of a proposal from Wisconsin and the Hiawatha Services Amtrak needing to expand their services, which we did not object to. It's just holding tracks were not considered environmentally safe. It was adjacent to many schools and right through a natural preserve. So, and hospitals in Glenview, it was a very big problem. But one of the issues I see that we really should be looking at is the self-regulation of the industry that really threatens us in an industry that's primarily concerned with profits versus safety. And many of the Obama-era regulations have been eliminated, including the electronic pneumatic braking systems, which were on the schedule to be implemented over a period of time. We know that these chemicals have to be transported, and people that are saying to me, well, it's safer to be on the train tracks than on the highways, may have a point. However, they're not currently being transported safely. And when profits always remain a higher priority than safety, we need to get involved. And this includes, like I suggested earlier, the environmental impacts of idling freight trains. Right now, they even sit for hours along the Metro Milwaukee North track, waiting to get into the city. These are heavily populated neighborhoods, and the trains are literally there spewing carcinogenic diesel fumes into the air, where children are out playing on the playgrounds right next to the tracks. This is really a huge environmental impact. So the speed of the trains, part of the Amtrak proposal was to increase the speeds of freight trains from 40 miles per hour to 50 miles per hour on this heavy populated railway, so that they could move faster through. And certainly we know from the derailments that the DOT 117 tank cars are not safe enough. Those that have had derailments have had problems, and they may be safer than the 111s, DOT 111s, but they're still not the answer to a safer transportation of hazmat chemicals. So there's a lot to be concerned about, and I think we really need to get engaged in a political sense because people are not aware of most of these problems. And being proactive is the only way to stop this. That's all I have to say.
I agree with everything she said.
I know that time is running short, and yes, I agree, and thank you for that. And I just want to make sure the carriers in this current national round of bargaining are aggressively pushing for engineer-only single-employee crews. We didn't have the time to cover all the many reasons of why this is just going to increase the dangers. But we don't know where this could turn into a showdown between rail labor and the carriers. And so if it does, we will need as much of the public support. So stay tuned. Go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, and stay tuned because you'll probably be hearing about this. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I have an action plan on the people-B4 profit-profits.org, the website I showed you at the beginning. There is an action plan. So there's a lot of detail of where we're at, what we can do. One thing I would like to start doing is probably in the summer, but I need support, and I need to know that there would be people who would be interested in doing this also, but perhaps doing some rallies near schools to make sure, well, in an effort to bring attention. I don't want to do it when students are in session, not that they are right now, but if things were normal, which right now they are not, I don't want to disrupt the learning day or disrupt students, but or maybe somebody has a better idea, but some way to draw attention to schools that are in blast zones and bring attention so that parents will know that their child could be in danger.
Jerry, this is Mark Lundholm again. I know you cited some things with our state and national legislatures. Was I wrong in that Ann Gillespie had something to do with some legislation?
Then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
What is the state of our legislature in the state with policies or laws or legislation to put through? And those are some of the things that we get involved with NWSOFA. So any guidance there or suggestions as to how we could get involved?
Yeah, I am familiar with Senator Gillespie. She did not have, she may support something that I'm unaware of, but in terms of the resolution 982 that I was working on, it was Senator Julie Morrison that introduced it. And, this is another—
Maybe I'm mixing them up.
Yeah,
I know Julie comes to our meetings sometimes too.
Well, this is another reason why it's so important to keep a line of communication open with our elected officials. Because, who would have ever thought that, I could just go to a senator, well, certainly I didn't, but, just go to a senator and say, I have this concern, and could you do something about it? It was amazing that she said yes and then did. It was that easy, depending on what it is you're trying to get through, of course. And not only, I didn't even have to, Senator Laura Murphy, I didn't even have to ask her anything. I was talking to one of her legislative aides, and next thing I know, he said, would you like Laura Murphy to co-sponsor? And I said, oh my gosh, why didn't I ask? Of course I do. So we really need to work on keeping these lines. We need to be meeting with our elected officials. We have to go beyond just getting them elected. We need to make sure that they're representing our interests. And many times, when I first started this in 2014, my first experience with an open board meeting and my mayor went very badly. And I had a horrible outlook on our elected officials. But through the work I've done, I've really come around to a whole new appreciation of what they do, the efforts they take, what they have to do in order to get things passed. It's not enough for them to want something. they have to have a majority vote. And we as citizens need to do our civic responsibility and participate and get them voted and talk to other people in other locations and networking, which is, you know, your organization is a growing organization, and that kind of a network can make things happen. So I guess I'm going to pass the torch to you, Bill,
or Christine.
Actually, we're gonna pass it back to Mark Lundgren to kind of do a recap. Mark?
Wow, you know, a lot was covered. I think a lot needs to be covered. The second time I've heard this amazes me as much as the first time. And, you know, there are certainly things that I think that OFA and Indivisible can link to some of this stuff. And I think some of our partner groups would probably like to have Jerry and Mark come and present there. Does anybody else have suggestions for actions other than what Jerry just put out? And I just want to thank everybody for their participation.
Thank you all very much.
Could you just make sure that as bills, would it be you as bills are presented either in Springfield or in DC, that we're aware of those so we can act on those?
Yes, I will. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Thank you. I will be posting those on peoplebeforeprofits.org. Currently, I've worked with Congressman Schneider. So, you know, what Senator Morrison had adopted, it was a resolution. The problem with resolutions is they have no teeth. And even if we do get a bill, I'm still working on trying to get a state official to sponsor a bill that calls for certain protocol, consistent protocol to be followed in the event of an emergency. But I have worked with a legislative aide Congressman Schneider's, who works in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in Washington, D.C. They are currently drafting such legislation to help protect our students at our schools. I know what I asked for, and that is in my action plan on my website. I don't know what it's actually going to look like. Last I talked to Tommy Brown, he said it was soon to be introduced, but this was before our current pandemic. So I'm sure that's been put on hold. I don't know when we'll see it introduced, but I was told that, you know, it should be introduced soon. So I don't know what that means given the current pandemic, but I know they've worked at, it's been drafted, and last I know they were talking to stakeholders, which I understand to mean, you know, schools and emergency personnel that would be impacted by the legislation. But, you know, like I said, in Illinois, it had a unanimous vote. I don't think anybody's going to disagree for the need to keep our students safe. It's that we need to get it in place. So I'm hoping to see that come soon.
Okay. Mark, anything?
So I think I'm done with what I need to know, and my agenda says ask Sarah and Bill what other online events will be happening during this month, and also how to let people know how they can get involved with NWSOFA-Indivisible, and thanks for everybody participating tonight.
And I would just like to thank you for having us on behalf of Railroad Workers United. Thank you very much for this opportunity to just have this discussion with you.
So,
even if we had to move it online because of other circumstances.
Just a few notes. NWSOFA, you can find us very easily by going www.nwsofa.org. And we have a very nice website that is laid out by the 9 issue groups that we have. You'll find a photos area where we capture every event. I think we had 85 or 95 last year. A little bit of a challenge taking pictures of these online events, but we're learning it. We're learning fast. Just a few notes here real quick. We really appreciate Jerry, you and Mark and Michelle, Shelley and Fritz's coming on and being part of this. That was great.
Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and we had Joe Salvato join us from Cincinnati. Joe was our original 7 years ago climate lead. And I can tell you, I didn't know much about the climate change, etc., but I learned a lot from Joe. And that has, over the 7 years, that legacy has been carried forth to Marge, who passed away several years ago, and now Mark. Just doing a great job by bringing new people in and new ideas, which is exactly what we're about, informing our members. On the call tonight, we have several people with the League of Women Voters. I think Laura has left, but Jim, I've heard you ask some questions. I believe you go down to Springfield. I believe it's with the League of Women Voters on some legislative issues. Is that correct?
Yeah, I am now for the state of Illinois, the gun violence specialist for the League of Women Voters. So great. I do a lot with them at this point.
And Jim is also a co-lead in our Restore Our Democracy. I also want to point out that we have a rising politician among us, Maggie Trevor, who survived by a 85% margin.
81.
What was that, Maggie?
81 to 19. So it's actually a 62-point margin, but.
She is running for District 54. That is a seat held by Tom Morrison, a very conservative Republican, and everybody's going to be turning out to work for her. Maggie, do you have a comment or two you'd like to make?
I think this has just been very informative. It's interesting that the Union Pacific line basically bisects the district. And so I think this is a really important issue for the district. So I learned a lot today.
Thank you so much for being here. I've actually met you before.
Oh.
I am wishing you the best.
Thank you.
And I know your opponent, and I would definitely vote for you if I could.
Yay! We'll all have her back.
Oh, yes. I will talk you up every opportunity I have.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sarah Haran, you are the co-lead of this group. Is there anything you'd like to add tonight?
I would just like to let folks know this is a whole new world for us, and behind the scenes, Christine, you can see, and Bill and Jerry and Mark, I don't know how many hours they spent to get everything, to get the sound to work. I think it came out tremendous. Those of you that are maybe kind of new to us, and if you have anything that you particularly liked about how this worked, would you come back for more? If you have anything we need to tweak, we definitely appreciate your feedback. I know a couple of you, I wasn't sure who everybody is, and maybe some new folks. There was, let me go down the list. Tracy or... let's see. Is there a Carrie? Are you still on? I didn't know how you found us. Are you probably still muted?
Hey, Sarah, it's Mikey.
Yes.
I know Carrie.
Oh, okay. Okay, so anybody have any comments just on overall? Is this something where we're all sitting at home doing whatever, and I think it was just so valuable to be able to have quality time to learn, to find out actions we need to be thinking about beyond what's going on in our world. So definitely chip in if you got something to say. Appreciate it.
Yeah, hey, Sarah, this is Jim. The only problem with these is we can't go out for a beer afterwards.
Hey, Jim, I got my brownies here. I made the last two. There's one left. Here comes your birthday brownie.
We could all break them out.
Okay.
All right. We have one other thing to talk about tonight, and I think this goes under the bonus round. Look over at curtain 5. We've got a bonus round here. Christine, will you give us some idea of what you've been doing in the background tonight and what we're preparing?
So I've been recording the bridge and putting faces in as they're available, and I should be able to get this up over the weekend to our NWSOFA YouTube channel. It's actually worked out pretty well. We got some good sound with the video, and the deck came over pretty clean. So far, the bandwidth has kept up very nicely. When we close the meeting, I would like to have the presenters stick around. So hopefully you're willing to take some feedback, and I'll give you my observations. And at that point, I'm ready to end the recording.
Just so you know what that means, the YouTube channel, you can find us on NWSOFA YouTube. Christine's been setting up in our meetings and taking videos, putting up the presentations, capturing the speakers, and capturing the audience participation. Been very nice. So trying to figure out how to make this into that is cool. But once we get that done, we can start broadcasting out to not only our membership, and we have 5,000 in our 6 township area, but also our Facebook accounts and our Twitter accounts. We can start literally putting this online, either using Facebook Live or Facebook Watch or whatever. So our hope is what we experienced tonight was, as Christine likes to say, it was like a broadcast event, but we were the audience in the room and asking questions and etc. But now we'll send it out to like a TV audience, a much broader audience, and see how much more we can drive forward on that. The issue, Mark, is an excellent issue for our climate change. Thank you for discovering Jerry, or vice versa. I'm not quite sure how it happened, but it was great to have.
I think Sarah found out about it and forwarded it to me last fall when they had their presentation in Deerfield. So thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
It was good. Knew she was a good one.
Yes.
Grab her. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
All right.
This is a vast improvement over last night's test. So thank you.
Well, that's why we test. You know what? When Christine says thanks for all the time, or Sarah said all the time that was put in, I can guarantee you not only a lot of time was put on the NWSOFA side, but Jerry and Mark and Michelle, they just and Shelley just did a lot of work. Yesterday at this time, those videos didn't have sound. And it's not an easy click of a switch to make that sound come out. It worked perfect, folks.
That's all Mark.
Shelley.
And Shelley. I shouldn't say all, right.
So when all this social distancing is over, Jim, we're going to take you up, Jim McGrath. We'll all have a beer, and we'll get the presenters team, Jerry, Mark, Michelle, Shelley, all together. Fritz, I understand you're not close, but we'll send you a beer. All right, folks.
I'll drink to that.
Here.
All right.
Virtual beer.
Yeah, virtual beer. We've got to figure out how to do that. So let's all sign off. I'll have to stay on, I think, so that this thing still goes. But we'd like to have Jerry, Mark, and Michelle or Shelley be on. Is that who you want, Christine?
Yeah, everyone can